Hello, I'm going to talk a little bit about soil and just give some very brief descriptions on soil and how we classify soil. It gets much more complex than what I'm about to go over, but this is a good starting point. When we look at soil and a soil profile, that means we go down into the soil and look at the different layers. What we see, at least at the very most basic level, is we're gonna have 5 different layers here that we're gonna talk about. They can be broken down further, but these are the 5 primary ones. And what we see is that soils, they're gonna have different layers, and that's gonna be based on composition. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that each layer has different components, different parts. And you can see that even in this image here. There's different colors to the soils. There are different size rocks that you can see in some of the layers. And we can make a distinction between these layers based on that different composition. Now, the first layer that we were talking about, the very top layer, is the O layer. And the O layer is where we're gonna find things like in this image. That's where the grass is growing. And what you see among that growing grass is you're gonna see some of the grass that has died, right? And it's laying there on the top. So this very topmost layer from here to here or so. You see some stuff is slightly buried and it's decomposing. And some stuff hasn't started to decompose yet. So we see some of the dead grass leaves or blades along here that haven't started to decompose. But then just underneath, we do see some that are starting to break down and being decomposed from different decomposers, right? Like worms and other microorganisms, fungi that are living in the soil. There's a lot of life in these first few inches of soil. There's a lot of things that are breaking down materials, breaking down organic matter. And that makes this first couple of layers, this O layer and the next one, very rich in organic material, which you have to have if you're going to have growth from the soil. The soil has to have this organic material because new plants will take up the nutrients of this organic material to use to build their plant parts. After the O layer, we have this A layer. And you'll also see in this image, there's an E layer. For our purposes, we're going to combine the A and the E layer. Often that E layer is lightly colored. But I'm going to talk about the A layer in association with also the E layer as part of it. We still have lots of organic material. And because there's organic material at this layer, we have plants that will send roots down into this A and into this A layer right here. And they're going to send roots down and they're going to pick up nutrients from that dead and decayed material that has been broken down and decomposed. They're going to pick up things like nitrogens and phosphorus and elements like that. There's also going to be some moisture down there. And they can pull up moisture through their roots for use by the plant or by the tree. So it penetrates down into these layers. And then you'll start to see a change after that. Sometimes when you see that very lightly colored E layer, then you're gonna see a change to this B layer. Now the B layer, you're getting far less organic material, if any. But there might be a little bit of that down here, a little bit of moisture, less than A, but more rock particles. So B is really a mixture of the upper and lower layers. It's kind of that boundary between these rocky sublayers and these organic top layers. And then finally, we're gonna have the two bottom layers, which are your sea layers and your bedrock. So the sea layer is mainly composed up of larger broken down rocks. And you can see in this picture, the rock sizes are pretty big. They can be boulder size. Where that B layer that we talked about, which was the transition, that's gonna have more smaller rocks, pebbles and some of your sands and things like that. But this sea layer, you can really see the rock there. It's recently broken down, or it's still in the process of erosion and breaking down. Also, since the sea layer is sitting on this bedrock, which is literal rock barrier, you know, nothing's penetrating through that solid rock. And what I mean by nothing is like, there's no organic material that's sinking down into it. There's no water that's sinking down into it. So water, groundwater, tends to move through this sea layer. Because it can't go any lower. So it travels through this sea layer, which has big rocks, but also some spaces, because you have these big rocks, where that water can move along and eventually make its way to a lower point where it meets up with some other water running into streams, rivers, and eventually lakes or oceans. Okay, so that's just some basics there of soil profiles and the different layers and why we categorize different layers.